Welcome Family Revenge Stories New. And today's tale is one that will have you shaking your head in disbelief, gripping your armrest in secondhand fury, and perhaps, just perhaps, nodding along with a quiet, satisfied smile by the time it's all over. This is the story of how a mother's entitlement, a sister's greed, and one unauthorized charge on a debit card set off a chain of events that nobody in the family saw coming. It is a story about boundaries, about financial independence, about the slow and painful realization that love without respect is merely manipulation wearing a warm disguise. It is at its core a story about waking up. Our narrator, let's call her Maya, was 26 years old at the time these events unfolded. She had spent the better part of her young adult life doing what so many firstborn daughters in tightly knit families learn to do almost instinctively, sacrificing her own needs for the comfort and happiness of everyone around her. She had grown up in a household where her mother, Linda, ruled with a combination of emotional warmth and quiet, suffocating control. Linda was not a monster. This is important to understand from the outset. She was a woman who genuinely believed that family loyalty meant an unconditional pooling of all resources, all energy, and all sacrifice, provided the sacrifice flowed in the right direction. And in Linda's household, the right direction was always toward her younger daughter, Cassie. Cassie was 22. She was vivacious, charming, and utterly accustomed to having her path smoothed by the labor of others. Where Maya had worked 2 jobs through college to avoid burdening the family, Cassie had been fully funded by their parents and had still somehow managed to graduate with a modest amount of debt that everyone in the family treated as a collective wound. Where Maya had moved out at 21 and begun building a careful, disciplined financial life for herself, budgeting, saving, tracking every dollar, Cassie still lived at home, contributing little to household expenses, and operating under the assumption that the universe and her family owed her comfort as a matter of birthright. None of this was entirely Cassie's fault. She had been shaped by the same household that had shaped Maya. The difference was simply that the shaping had gone in opposite directions for each of them. By the time Maya was 26, she had saved a respectable emergency fund, had no credit card debt, drove a modest but reliable used car she had paid for in cash, and had recently opened what she considered her most exciting financial milestone yet. A high-yield savings account dedicated specifically to a trip she had been dreaming about for 3 years. She wanted to go to Portugal. She had a folder on her laptop full of carefully researched itineraries, hotel options sorted by neighborhood and price, a list of restaurants with notes on reservation windows, and a rough budget that she had been feeding quietly and deliberately for 18 months. The fund sat at just over $4,000. She needed approximately $5,000 to feel comfortable making the booking. She was, in every measurable sense, almost there. She had not told her mother about the Portugal fund. She had not told Cassie. She had learned, through years of careful observation, that announcing a financial goal in her family home was the quickest way to have that goal reframed as a selfish indulgence and her savings reframed as a communal resource. She kept her account information private. She had a separate checking account for everyday expenses, and a debit card linked to that account that she used for groceries, gas, and the occasional dinner out. The Portugal savings account had its own debit card, which Maya kept in a slim card holder in the inner zip pocket of her work bag, separate from her wallet, and used for anything other than the occasional online transfer to add more money to it. She did not know that her mother knew about this card. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, when she received a text message notification from her bank informing her that her savings debit card had been used at a travel agency for a charge of $3,247. Maya read the notification twice. Then she read it a third time. Then she sat very still at her desk at work for approximately 90 seconds, which felt like a geological era, before she picked up her phone and called the bank. The bank confirmed the charge. It had been processed approximately 40 minutes earlier. It was not a fraudulent charge in the technical sense. The card had been present physically at the point of transaction. Maya asked the bank to flag the account and freeze further transactions while she investigated, and then she sat back in her chair and thought very carefully about what she already knew, what she needed to find out, and in what order she needed to do things. She left work early, citing a personal matter, and drove home, not to her own apartment but to her mother's house. She knew without needing to call ahead that this was where the answer would be. When she arrived, Linda was in the kitchen making tea, and Cassie was at the dining room table with a laptop open, surrounded by the unmistakable detritus of travel planning. Printed pages, a highlighter, a notepad with scrawled figures. Maya stood in the doorway and looked at the scene for a moment before either of them noticed her. When Linda saw Maya, her expression did something complicated. A flicker of guilt, quickly replaced by the bright, compensatory smile of someone who has prepared their justification and is ready to deliver it. Cassie looked up from the laptop and immediately looked back down, which told Maya everything she needed to know about Cassie's level of complicity in what had happened. Maya asked, with remarkable calmness given the circumstances, what had been charged to her card that afternoon. Linda set down the teapot. She did not look ashamed. She looked, if anything, slightly aggrieved to have been put in the position of explaining herself, which Maya recognized as a classic opening move in her mother's conflict playbook. Linda explained that she had borrowed Maya's savings card. She knew where it was because she had seen it once when she was helping Maya look for something in her bag the previous Christmas, and that she had used it to put a deposit down on a vacation package for Cassie. The vacation, Linda explained in a tone that suggested Maya should already be aware of and grateful for this context, was a trip to Cancun that Cassie had been wanting to take for over a year. It was a graduation trip of sorts, though Cassie had graduated 2 years prior. It was also, Linda continued, a trip that was very important for Cassie's mental health, because Cassie had been having a hard time lately. The deposit, Linda said, was non-refundable, which she mentioned in the same breath as her justification, and which Maya recognized immediately as a preemptive fortification against the obvious response. You can't ask for the money back now, the non-refundable detail implied. So let's skip past that part of the conversation. Maya was quiet for a moment after her mother finished speaking. Then she said, with the same preternatural calm she had maintained since walking through the door, that she would like to understand something clearly. She asked her mother whether she had, at any point in the process of accessing Maya's bag, locating the card, transporting herself and the card to a travel agency, and completing a transaction worth over $3,000, considered calling Maya first to ask whether this was acceptable. Linda's answer, which came with a sigh and a slight pivot of the body that communicated weary patience in the face of unreasonable opposition, was that she had not called because she had known Maya would say no. This statement, so candid, so utterly unashamed in its logic, was perhaps the most clarifying thing Linda had ever said to Maya in 26 years. She had not called because she had known Maya would say no, which meant she had known that what she was doing was something Maya would object to, which meant she had made a deliberate calculation that her own judgment and Cassie's desires outweighed Maya's right to be consulted about her own money. And she had proceeded anyway. Maya told her mother and sister that she needed to make a phone call. She stepped out to the backyard. She called the bank again and spent 25 minutes speaking with a fraud specialist. She explained the situation honestly, that someone she knew had physically taken her card and used it without her authorization. The specialist explained that because the card had been physically present and the charge had not been challenged at the point of sale, the dispute process would be more complex than a standard unauthorized digital transaction, but that her case had merit and she should file a formal dispute and a police report. The specialist was careful not to tell Maya what to do, but the information was clearly laid out. Maya thanked the specialist, ended the call, and stood in her mother's backyard for another few minutes looking at the garden. Linda had always kept a beautiful garden. There was something almost unbearably poignant about that. The roses, the care, the attention to beauty in the external world, coexisting with such a fundamental disregard for the interior worlds of the people who loved her. Maya went back inside. She told her mother and Cassie what the bank had told her. She explained that what had been done constituted unauthorized use of her financial account, which was taken seriously by banks and by law. She said this not as a threat, but as information. She told them, going to give the situation 24 hours before she decided on a course of action. She asked that neither of them contact her during that period. Then she picked up her bag, drove to her apartment, made herself dinner, and did not cry until she was washing the dishes. The 23 calls began within 2 hours of Maya leaving. The first came from her mother, approximately 90 minutes after Maya had driven away. Maya did not answer. A voicemail was left. Maya did not listen to it that evening. The second call came 40 minutes later, also from Linda. Then a third, a fourth. By midnight, there had been 11 calls from her mother's number. Sometime around 10 in the evening, Cassie's name also began appearing on the screen, contributing 4 more calls before midnight. Maya's phone was set to Do Not Disturb, but she could see the notifications stacking up on her lock screen like a small, increasingly frantic monument to consequence. By the following morning, when Maya woke up and counted, there had been 23 calls in total, 14 from Linda, 9 from Cassie, spread across the evening and early morning hours. There were 11 voicemails, 8 text messages, and 1 message sent through a family group chat that Maya's aunt was also part of, which meant that by 9 in the morning, Maya had also received a text from her Aunt Donna asking if everything was okay between her and her mother because Linda had posted something vague and worrying on the family thread. Maya brewed coffee and listened to every voicemail in chronological order. This was not masochism. It was research. The first voicemail from her mother was conciliatory in tone. Linda explained again about Cassie's mental health, about how much the trip meant, about how she had only meant to help, about how she had planned to pay Maya back eventually and had simply not mentioned it yet because she had not had the chance. The phrase, "I was going to tell you," appeared in this voicemail, which struck Maya as worthy of note. The second voicemail was slightly less conciliatory. Linda's voice carried an undertone of frustration, as though Maya's failure to answer the phone were itself an act of aggression. She said that she didn't understand why Maya was making such a big deal of this. They were family. Families helped each other. Hadn't Maya benefited from family support over the years? The third voicemail began to escalate. Linda mentioned that she had already told the travel agency the trip was confirmed, that Cassie was counting on it, and that if Maya did anything to interfere with that, she would be hurting her sister in a way that was frankly unforgivable. The word unforgivable was applied without apparent irony to Maya's potential decision to dispute an unauthorized charge on her own bank account. By the fifth and sixth voicemails, which came later in the evening after it had become clear Maya was not going to call back, Linda's tone had shifted again, this time towards something raw and more wounded. She talked about how she had sacrificed so much for both of her daughters. She talked about not being appreciated. She mentioned the time she had driven Maya to the emergency room when Maya was 19 and had broken her wrist, which Maya filed away mentally as an interesting data point about which emotional resources were being drawn upon tonight. Cassie's voicemails were different in texture. Cassie oscillated between defensive and pleading in a way that suggested she was more aware of her own culpability than her expression at the dining room table had implied. In one message she said she hadn't known Mom was going to use Maya's card specifically, which was either true or strategic and Maya wasn't certain which. In another message she said that Portugal would still be there and Cancun was really not that expensive and she'd pay Maya back as soon as she could, which told Maya that Cassie understood at some level that the Portugal trip was the real loss here, even if she hadn't known about it. In her last voicemail, recorded sometime after midnight, Cassie sounded genuinely distressed, and Maya felt the familiar, exhausting pull of sympathy that she had been managing her entire life. She felt the sympathy. She noted it. She did not act on it immediately. Instead, she poured a second cup of coffee, opened her laptop, and spent the morning doing 3 things. First, she drafted a detailed written account of the incident, what had happened when, what her mother had said, what the bank had advised, and saved it as a document. Second, she called her bank again and formally initiated the dispute process, providing the written account and her contact information. Third, She called her landlord and confirmed that her rent was up to date, and that she had no upcoming financial obligations that would be affected by the temporary hold on her savings account while the dispute was processed. Then she sat for a while and thought about what she wanted. This is perhaps the most important part of the story, and the part that tends to get glossed over in the retelling, the moment where Maya had to decide not just what she was going to do about the money, but what she was going to do about everything. Because the money, $3,247, was real and significant and mattered enormously in the practical sense. But it was also, she understood with crystalline clarity, a symptom. It was the most vivid and undeniable expression of something that had been operating in her family for as long as she could remember. The assumption that Maya's resources, Maya's time, Maya's patience, and Maya's future were all legitimately available for redistribution, according to her mother's priorities. The unauthorized charge was new in its boldness. The underlying logic was not new at all. It had been present in every conversation where her savings had been described as excessive and her spending priorities questioned. It had been present in every family gathering where Cassie's needs had been treated as urgent and Maya's as optional. It had been present in the way Linda talked about Maya's apartment as a luxury and Cassie's continued residence at home as a reasonable and even admirable choice. The card was just the card. The card was the most honest thing her mother had ever done. In a perverse way, it made visible and literal what had always been the implicit arrangement. Maya called her mother back that afternoon. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She had spent the morning preparing herself, not for a fight, but for a conversation that she needed to have with total clarity and without the emotional flooding that her mother was skilled, perhaps unconsciously, at inducing. She told Linda that she had initiated a formal dispute with the bank, and that depending on how the dispute was resolved, the travel agency's payment might be reversed. She explained that this was a natural consequence of using her card without her permission, and that she wanted Linda to understand that this outcome was not something Maya was doing to punish her. It was simply how unauthorized charges worked. Linda, to her credit, did not immediately erupt. There was a long silence. Then she asked, in a quieter voice than Maya expected, what Maya wanted her to do. Maya said she wanted two things. First, she wanted Linda to fully reimburse her the $3,247. Second, she wanted to have a real conversation at some point in the near future about the patterns in their family that had made her mother think this was something she could do. The first request produced an immediate problem, which was that Linda did not have $3,000 available in any readily accessible form. What followed was an uncomfortable and illuminating conversation about Linda's finances, which revealed that she and Maya's father, who was largely absent from this particular drama, being the sort of man who preferred not to engage with domestic conflict, did not have significant savings, that Cassie's comfort had been prioritized over the family's financial cushion for years, and that the plan, to the extent there had been one, had been for Linda to somehow accumulate the money over the following months and transfer it to Maya quietly, without anyone having to have an uncomfortable conversation about it in the meantime. Maya listened to all of this without interrupting. When her mother finished, she said that she understood the situation, but that understanding it did not change what had happened or what needed to happen next. She said that she was not going to drop the bank dispute. She said that she was not able to absorb this loss and continue saving for her trip on the same timeline. She said that she was genuinely sorrowful that this was difficult, but that difficulty was not the same as injustice, and she needed her mother to appreciate the difference. The second call from Linda that afternoon, which came about 3 hours after the first, was to inform Maya that Cassie was devastated. Maya said she was sorry Cassie was hurt. She meant it, actually. But she also knew that Cassie's devastation, real as it was, did not alter the facts of what had occurred. The bank dispute process took 11 days. During those 11 days, Maya maintained a policy of answering calls from her mother when she felt emotionally resourced to do so, and declining them when she did not. She was consistently civil. She was consistently clear. She did not escalate, but she also did not soften her position. There were family members who heard about the situation through the grapevine: Aunt Donna, a cousin named Priya who called to offer unsolicited mediation, and a family friend who sent Maya a text suggesting that she was being unnecessarily hard on her mother. Maya thanked each of them politely for their concern and said that she was handling the matter privately. At the end of the 11 days, the bank dispute was resolved partially in Maya's favor. The travel agency agreed to refund approximately $2,400 of the original charge, citing a good faith adjustment rather than a full reversal, because the booking had been partially consumed in processing fees. Maya was disappointed but not devastated. She received the partial refund, noted the remaining balance owed by her mother, and drafted a simple unemotional written agreement that she asked Linda to sign. A document stating that Linda owed Maya $847, to be paid in monthly installments of no less than $100, beginning the following month. Linda signed it after 2 days of silence. Cassie did not go to Cancun. The trip had been effectively canceled when the refund was processed, and without the deposit, no new booking could be made. This was, predictably, the part of the story that generated the most sustained family emotion. Cassie grieved the trip loudly and at length. Linda revisited it in several phone calls with Maya, the question of whether Maya could have handled things differently. Maya each time gently and firmly returned the conversation to the original question. Had Linda used Maya's card without asking? Yes. Had she known Maya would say no? Yes, she had said as much. Then the consequences that followed were a direct result of that decision, and Maya did not think it was reasonable to hold Maya responsible for them. It took approximately 4 months for the full $847 to be repaid. Linda made the payments faithfully, even though the process was humbling for her. Maya kept records of each transfer. On the day the final installment came through, she sent her mother a brief text. Received. Thank you. Nothing more, because nothing more was needed. The conversation Maya had wanted to have, the real one about the patterns, happened about 2 months after the financial resolution. Maya invited her mother to lunch, just the two of them, at a restaurant they both liked and that had enough ambient noise to make an emotionally difficult conversation feel slightly less exposed. She had thought carefully about what she wanted to say, and how she wanted to say it. She was not interested in cataloging grievances or in winning an argument. She was interested in being known by her mother, actually known in the way that people who love you should know you. She told Linda about Portugal. She told her about the folder on her laptop, the 18 months of saving, the research into neighborhoods and restaurants, and the specific week in October that she had identified as ideal for the weather and the crowds. She told her mother what it had felt like to receive the bank notification at her desk at work. Not just the shock and the anger, but the particular kind of grief underneath those feelings, the grief of realizing that the thing you had been quietly building and protecting had been reached into and diminished by someone who was supposed to be on your side. Linda was quiet for a long time. Maya was prepared for defensiveness, for the soft revisionism that her mother sometimes deployed when confronted with the impact of her choices. What she was not fully prepared for was what actually happened. Linda's eyes filled with tears, and she said, in a voice that was smaller and more unguarded than Maya was accustomed to hearing from her, that she had not thought of it that way. She said that she had thought of Maya's savings as a resource rather than a dream. She said that she wasn't sure when she had started doing that, thinking of Maya as someone who had capacity to spare rather than as a person with her own wants and plans and fears about the future. It was not an apology that resolved everything. It was not a conversion experience. Linda did not emerge from that lunch as a transformed person who would never again lean on Maya in ways that were inappropriate. But it was honest, and it was the beginning of something. A renegotiation, slow and imperfect, of the terms on which Maya and her mother related to each other. Maya booked her trip to Portugal 7 months later, when her savings account had been rebuilt to its previous level. She went alone, which was a decision she had gone back and forth on for a while before arriving at a kind of peace with it. She spent 10 days there in October, exactly when she had planned. She ate at several of the restaurants she had researched. She walked through neighborhoods she had marked on digital maps so many months ago. She sat one evening at a cafe table in Lisbon as the sun went down over the hills and felt the specific, hard-won satisfaction of a person who had insisted on her own life and arrived, at last, inside it. She sent her mother a photograph from that cafe table. Just the view, the warm light on the old buildings, a glass of white wine at the edge of the frame. Her mother replied with 3 words. "It's beautiful, Maya." It was. The lessons that this story offers are not complicated, but they bear stating plainly, because the clarity of the obvious is sometimes what we need most. The first lesson is that financial privacy within families is not selfishness. It is sanity. The instinct to keep your savings separate, your goals unannounced, your card in an inner pocket, is a reasonable and healthy response to an environment where resources flow in one direction. You are not obligated to make your financial life available for redistribution by people who love you. Love does not create property rights. The second lesson is about the difference between understanding and acquiescence. Maya understood her mother's financial limitations. She understood Cassie's disappointment. She held all of that with genuine compassion. And she still maintained her position. These things are not contradictory. You can feel for someone and still hold them accountable. You can love a person and still decline to absorb the consequences of their poor choices. Understanding why someone did something does not require you to act as though they didn't do it. The third lesson is about the slow work of renegotiation. The lunch in the restaurant was not a dramatic confrontation. It was not revenge in any satisfying cinematic sense. It was 2 people sitting across from each other and attempting, carefully and imperfectly, to see each other more clearly. That kind of work is slow and unglamorous and frequently unfinished. But it is the only kind that actually changes anything. The fourth lesson, and perhaps the most important, is about the compound interest of self-advocacy. Every time Maya held her position, every time she returned a phone call on her own timeline, every time she answered her mother's escalating emotions with calm repetition of the facts, she was doing something that would have costs and would also have returns. The costs were real. The family tension, the cousin's unsolicited mediation text, the months of uncomfortable lunches and careful conversations. The returns were also real. A rebuilt savings account, a trip to Portugal, and a relationship with her mother that, while not transformed, was at least more honest than it had been before. And somewhere in that honesty, in the acknowledgement that Maya was a person with her own dreams and her own property and her own right to say no, there was something that had not existed before. Not just between Maya and her mother, but within Maya herself. The quiet, solid knowledge that she had not disappeared. That she had insisted on being known. That when the people who were supposed to see her had looked through her instead, she had stepped forward into her own field of vision and said, "I am here. This is mine. You will not reach through me to take it." 23 calls. 11 voicemails. 1 photograph from a cafe table in Lisbon. A glass of white wine in the evening light. The story is complete.